So, we have some potentially really big news coming out of Canada. Here in my home and native land, our regulator, Health Canada, which is essentially the Canadian version of the FDA, has made some regulatory changes that will allow doctors in some very specific circumstances, and we'll get to what those specific circumstances are in a moment. But these regulatory changes will allow doctors, in some cases, to prescribe psychedelic therapy to their patients. Now, hold up. Did Canada just legalize psychedelic therapy on the quiet side and nobody even really noticed? Well, not exactly. Like I said, there are some very specific circumstances that it would have to apply under. So let's hop into exactly what Health Canada just announced. So, Health Canada announced some regulatory changes to something called the Special Access Program. So before we can get into what the changes are and why they're important, we first have to talk about what the Special Access Program is. So let's take a look at the Health Canada website here. We can read, Health Canada's SAP, Special Access Program, allows practitioners to request access to drugs that are not available in Canada for the emergency treatment of patients with serious or life-threatening conditions who have exhausted other treatment options. So to explain what this means using an example, if I am a doctor and my patient has disease Y, and we have already attempted all of the approved treatments for disease Y that are approved in Canada and he is still not getting any better, I consider it to be serious or even life-threatening. I can write to Health Canada as this patient's doctor and ask for permission or special access to give him another treatment which isn't approved in Canada but maybe is approved in another country or has some early data backing up the potential to use this as an effective treatment. Now, what is really important to note is that before the current regulatory changes, which we're about to discuss, doctors could not ask for special access for quote-unquote restricted drugs, or in other words, illegal drugs. So if I think, and there is some data that shows that MDMA, a restricted drug, can help my patient, it does not matter. I would not be able to get permission from Health Canada because that is a restricted drug, and doctors cannot ask for special permission to give restricted drugs because they are illegal. Now, that is exactly what is changing now. So if we take a look at a proposal, which again apparently has been passed, and just on a little bit of a side note, it's really surprising that the media hasn't picked up on this that much. This seems like it's a really big deal, and yet the only people I could find talking about this in the media were, first of all, Numinous, which of course isn't a media company, it's a psychedelic medicines company that will be one of the companies that can benefit from this. And then the only real article I could find on this online was this article here done by Amanda Siebert. I hope I said her name right, I don't have it in front of me. Yeah, Amanda Siebert, for the Dales report. But other than this, it's basically radio silence, which is strange because it's a really big development. And I would expect the media to have hopped on it. But whatever, I'm getting sidetracked, getting back to the purpose of this video, taking a look at what this proposal is, which has now been approved. It says, the Special Access Program would treat restricted drugs like all other controlled substances. Practitioners could request restricted drugs for patients with serious or life-threatening conditions if other therapies A, have failed, B, aren't suitable, or C, aren't available in Canada. And super importantly, as you can see here, this amendment, this proposal, which again now has apparently been passed, this proposal does mention psychedelic therapies by name. Just getting into a little more detail here, it says that you can request these restricted drugs, or the request will be approved, where there is sufficient evidence of safety and efficacy for the treatment of the patient's condition. So getting back to our example, if I am the doctor and I have a patient that has, let's say, PTSD, And this patient has tried other forms of treatment. It has not worked. Their PTSD is very serious, and I am perhaps afraid for my patient's life. I can then write to Health Canada and say, yo, Health Canada, you see these MAP studies that show that 67% of people with PTSD improved so much that they no longer qualify to be diagnosed with PTSD, and 88% of people saw their symptoms decrease by 50% or more. Well, I have this patient that's not getting better. Would it be all right if perhaps I prescribe him some MDMA-assisted psychotherapy? And then Health Canada has 48 hours to respond either yes or no. Now, based on my reading of the evidence of safety and efficacy, I think the only two real treatments that probably meet that bar at this time are MDMA therapy for PTSD, because again, there is that phase 3 trial we just talked about, and then perhaps also psilocybin for depression, because there have been quite a number of clinical trials and studies done showing that psilocybin can be an effective treatment, at least for some people, to treat depression. There are literally dozens of other clinical trials that are attempting to use different psychedelics for different indications, but I'm not sure if they would meet that bar yet. I'm not sure. That's just my own personal speculation. But getting back to what we're talking about here, in this example, the doctor or the Health Canada would respond to me, the doctor, with either a yes or a no, giving me emergency access. So the big question that still remains here is the scope and scale of this. What I mean by this is how many doctors are going to be requesting access for psychedelic therapy, MDMA therapy, and psilocybin therapy, and of that number of doctors requesting access, how many of them are going to be approved? Obviously, the significance of this news story would vary greatly if we're talking about 10 patients gaining access to psilocybin therapy through this versus 10,000 patients throughout the course of the year gaining access to this. So that is still my big unanswered question right now. But just to read a little bit more on their website here, Health Canada's proposed amendment, which has now been passed and will go into force on January 5th, it says that the proposed regulatory amendments do not signal any intent towards the decriminalization or legalization of restricted drugs, and they are not intended to create large-scale access to restricted drugs. Clinical trials remain the best option to request access to restricted drugs or any other unapproved drugs, and to generate scientific evidence. So, again, at this stage, the significance of this story is still very much up in the air. We're going to have to wait and see how the regulators treat this change, if we're going to get tens of thousands of applications to use psychedelic therapy, and what percentage of those are going to go through. We already have clinics across Canada, to use the example of Numinous. There are many other companies, but Numinous is one of the larger ones that has psychedelic clinics in Canada. So if they have dozens or hundreds or thousands of patients going to their clinics and their doctors are asking Health Canada to give them exceptions to allow them to use MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, then how many of these are Health Canada ultimately going to approve? And as a quick reminder, Numinous is actually working with MAPS right now to assess whether or not MDMA psychotherapy is an effective treatment for PTSD. So they would be one of the biggest beneficiaries, I'm not even sure if that's the right word or not, but we're going to go with it, of this proposed change. So just to recap really quickly to make sure that everybody understands what I'm saying, I don't really have a script for this video, so maybe I'm all over the place, I'm not really sure. Up until now, Canada has had a program called the Special Access Program, whereby doctors could ask permission to the government, to the regulatory body, to give a treatment which isn't approved by Health Canada if they believe that it can help their patient who has a serious condition or a life-threatening condition. Up until now, they weren't allowed to ask for access to restricted or illegal drugs such as MDMA. But on January 5th, that is going to change. So doctors, under specific circumstances, if their patients have tried other options and there is data that supports the use of psychedelics such as MDMA and psilocybin on a case-by-case basis, can ask the regulatory body, Health Canada, for permission for special access to prescribe psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to their patients. The big question that is up in the air right now is how many people this will affect. Is it going to affect 5 people a year? Is it going to affect 50,000 people a year? And the answer to this question will determine how big of a story this really is. And as I say in literally every single episode, we're just going to have to wait and see how big of a deal this really is. But I have an inkling that this is a really, really big deal. And if we take a look in a year from now and take a look back at how many people this affected, we could even say that this was a turning point in Canada for the access to psychedelic medicines. But what do you guys think? Is this a big deal or not? Let me know down in the comments. Oh, and click on one of the videos you see on your screen now.